My boyfriend broke up with me because my best friends are men. What does it matter if I was intimate with them in the past? Why can't he understand? I don't know if I'm really wrong or if my ex-boyfriend is just being dramatic and controlling. Sometimes I feel like everything got distorted and I can no longer distinguish what's normal and what's not. I wonder if it's really wrong to have male friends. And being honest, what does it matter that I slept with them once if that's in the past? I wasn't cheating on anyone. I was always clear with myself. My first boyfriend's name was Esteban. We met in high school and were together for about 3 years. We broke up before starting college in a pretty calm way. We were young, there were no big dramas, we just each went our own way. Esteban is a stable, calm, very fun person. With him I experienced a love that I'll always consider pure because we were each other's firsts. Everything was new for both of us. Intimacy was like that too. We learned together. We discovered what we liked together without comparisons or weird expectations. It was a beautiful stage of my life. After college we reconnected, and since then we've been friends again. He got married 3 years ago, and that never affected our friendship. We still meet up, go out for lunch, or a drink like we used to. For me, the fact that he's married doesn't change who he is. He's my best friend, someone who's known me since I was a teenager. On the other hand, when I was in my last years of college, I moved out of my parents' house and found a place to live with a guy I knew from school. His name was Martin. He lived in his grandparents' house and rented out rooms. Since we became friends, quickly I decided to take advantage of the situation and move in with him. That's how we became roommates. At first, I only liked Martin as a friend, not as a potential partner. Even now that we're still great friends, I can say he's a very unstable person. Martin drank a lot, used substances, and was always after every woman he could. The years we lived together, which were about 4, were divided between spending time together laughing and chatting or seeing him bring different women home. It was his lifestyle, and I accepted him as he was. I also had other relationships during those years, nothing out of the ordinary. Everything continued like that until one night when I ended a relationship and was feeling really bad. Martin stayed with me to keep me company. We started drinking, talking, venting, and one thing led to another. We ended up in his bed. Intimacy with Martin was spectacular, without exaggerating, the best of my life. For a few months, we were dedicated to that, sleeping together without labels, without demands, without problems. It was intense, natural, and there were no expectations for the future. But eventually he got back together with one of his exes, and we decided it was best to distance ourselves. However, it didn't work. Before we knew it, we were sleeping together again. It was at that moment that I understood that it had to end, and I felt that the only real way to cut off that dynamic was to leave. By then I was already working, so I moved into an apartment, which is where I live now. Even so, I maintained my friendship with Martin. We'd meet up some nights to drink, to talk about how our lives were going, but we never slept together again. I consider both Esteban and Martin my best friends in life. I tell them everything, and they tell me everything too. I know all of Esteban's marital problems. I know everything that has happened with Martin and his partners. In the same way, I have no secrets with them. It was always like that. It always worked. So the problem started when I began a relationship with my current boyfriend, or rather with my ex-boyfriend, because I don't think he's coming back. His name is Santiago. He's a co-worker, luckily from another department, so it's not that complicated to share the workspace. Santiago was very interested in me from the beginning. I, on the other hand, took things slow while I was still living with Martin because I didn't want problems or uncomfortable situations. Once I moved out, I decided to give him a chance. Santiago is a great guy. He's responsible, hardworking, you can talk to him, and I love him a lot. But from the beginning, I noticed he was very suspicious, and that was always a problem. During the time we were dating, before making the relationship official, I told him about Martin and Esteban, but without going into details. They're my friends, and for me, that should be enough explanation. At first, everything was fine. There were no problems, no arguments. But since we officially started the relationship, Santiago started behaving more and more strangely. I think it all started with Esteban's birthday. His wife was going to celebrate it at night, so I had arranged to go out for lunch with him at noon because otherwise we wouldn't have a chance to celebrate together. When I told Santiago that, he looked at me as if I were doing something wrong. Even so, I went out to lunch with Esteban, and we were a little later than expected. I had to apologize at work, and when I got back, Santiago was visibly annoyed. When we talked, he told me he didn't understand why I had to see my married friend alone for his birthday and why I didn't go directly to his house for the party. The first thing that bothered me was the way he said married, as if that changed anything, as if I were crossing some invisible line. I explained that I didn't want to go to Esteban's house, that the lunch was our thing, something about friendship, but he didn't understand. He continued to act as if I were wrong for wanting to share a moment with my best friend. That night, I felt so bad that I ended up calling Esteban. I told him everything that was happening, and he, despite it being his birthday, came to see me at my apartment for a while to cheer me up. He told me that his wife had gotten angry about it, but I felt very grateful for the gesture. I felt that at least someone was there for me. However, things with Santiago got really bad a couple of months later when he saw me leaving my apartment with Martine. The night before, we had argued because I had to cancel a date with him since Martine was feeling sick. Santiago started with his behavior that I already felt was toxic, saying that I couldn't leave him aside just because a friend said he was feeling bad. But I was worried about Martine, so I invited him to my apartment to relax. Martine arrived with a bottle of wine. We started talking and drinking calmly, trying to relax. When it got late, Martine stayed to sleep on my couch as he had done many times before. And I want to make that very clear, we trust each other because we're friends. I've also stayed over at his place several times. Nothing ever happened. The point is that the next morning, as we were leaving my apartment to go to work, Santiago was there. Seeing us leave together so early, he got angry immediately. He asked what was going on and why Martine was there at that hour. I don't usually give details or reports of what I do, but I was so angry about the scene he was making in front of my friend that I told him the truth without filters. I told him that Martine had spent the night there, and that's when the real argument started. Martine apologized as if he had done something wrong, even though I repeated that he didn't have to. Still, he was clearly uncomfortable, so he left. After that, Santiago and I went to work together. In the car, he told me that since we had argued the night before, he had gone to look for me to try to fix things. We got to work both angry, barely speaking to each other. That's exactly what I don't like about Santiago, that attitude that I feel is toxic and controlling, as if spending time with my friends were something bad, as if being there for a friend who's feeling bad were a terrible sin. I honestly hope to be able to talk to him calmly and set clear rules about how things were in my life. I thought we could reach a reasonable agreement. However, when we left work, it was Santiago who broke up with me directly. He told me he had already thought it over. I tried to tell him not to rush, that we could talk about our problems and find a solution, but he refused completely. He was determined. He told me he didn't understand what kind of relationship I had with Martine and Esteban, and that he didn't want to be part of that group, that he preferred to end it now and each go our own way. Before things got more serious and ended up affecting work too. He said he needed peace, and that with me, he didn't have it. I tried to make him understand that nothing was going on, that having friends is normal, that his reaction was exaggerated. I repeated that I was never unfaithful to him and that I was always honest, but he wouldn't listen to anything. He completely shut down any kind of communication. It was like talking to a wall. The truth is, it hurt that the relationship ended like that. Santiago is a good man, and I did see a future with him, but I feel that his toxicity and his jealousy were what destroyed everything. Maybe thinking about it coldly, it's for the best for both of us, although it still hurts. A few days ago, I called Esteban to chat and catch up. I needed to vent to someone who really knew me. We went to a bar, and I told him everything that had happened. He supported me and told me that not everyone is prepared for mature relationships like the ones I have with my friends. In the end, we drank too much and ended up going back to my apartment together, mostly so he wouldn't have problems with his wife later. Yes, he stayed with me that night, but as I've said several times, nothing happened. We're friends, we respect each other, and I think that's what a lot of people have trouble understanding. Still, I can't help but doubt. That's why I'm writing here. Do you think Santiago was right? Am I wrong for supporting and relying on my friends? Or was he really being dramatic and controlling? What do you think? Update 1. My best friend is getting a divorce because his wife thinks he's cheating on her with me. I understand that for some this may sound strange because not everyone is as mature or respectful as I am with my friends. Still, now I'm in a complicated situation, and I honestly don't know what the best way to act is. Everything got out of hand in a way I never imagined. My first boyfriend, Esteban, after we ended our relationship years ago, became one of my best friends. We're confidants, we have fun together, we go out for drinks, and we have absolute trust. That never changed, not even when he married Teresa, his wife. For me, the fact that he got married didn't alter what we always were as friends. I want to clarify something from the beginning. I have nothing against his wife, and I never had any intention of getting involved in their marriage. It was never my place or my interest, but apparently she always saw me as a threat, and I wasn't even present in their married life. I practically never went to their house. In fact, I preferred to meet with Esteban alone because that was always our dynamic from before and because I felt it was the most comfortable for everyone. On the other hand, I don't understand what fault I can have that Esteban didn't tell his wife he was with me. When all this exploded, I found out that he simply told her he was going out with friends. That's not my responsibility. That's something between the two of them. If as a couple they don't have the trust that Esteban and I always had as friends, then maybe there's a pre-existing problem there that has nothing to do with me. And all this started on my birthday. I like to celebrate with my closest friends with a good lunch or a good dinner. A simple plan, good food, some drinks, and a relaxed atmosphere. On this occasion, another of my friends had invited me for lunch, so when Esteban texted me to see me, I told him I was available in the evening. We made the plan without any problem. He picked me up from work after I got off and took me to a very nice restaurant. The food was excellent and the conversation was too. We caught up, laughed, and had a great time. At one point around 9 p.m., Esteban got a call and walked away to answer it. I didn't need to ask to know it was his wife. She was always quite controlling with him. I saw him argue on the phone for a while, and when he came back, he sat down in front of me with a tired expression. He just told me that Teresa was in a bad mood again. We decided not to talk about it anymore and continue enjoying the night. After dinner, we went to a bar for a drink and stayed there until after midnight. When we left, Esteban asked me directly if he could stay at my apartment. He told me he didn't feel like ruining such a nice night by going back to his house for his wife to give him problems, especially since he was a bit drunk. I agreed without thinking too much about it. We bought some drinks to continue the celebration and went to my apartment together. We were having a very quiet, relaxed time drinking and chatting in the living room. It was already quite late, around 2 a.m., when there was a knock on the door. We weren't being that loud, but I thought maybe a neighbor was coming to complain. I opened the door carefully, just a little, to see what was going on. And there was Teresa. She looked completely beside herself, furious. Before I could react, she pushed the door open and entered my apartment without permission, violently, basically an intrusion. I can partly understand that the scene could be misinterpreted by someone who doesn't know the relationship Esteban and I have. I was wearing a nightgown, which is what I sleep in. Esteban was in boxers because it was hot, and he was planning to sleep on the couch as he has done many times before. But Teresa started screaming as if she had caught us having sex. She was screaming and insulting Esteban, calling him a cheater and a bastard. He tried to explain to her that it wasn't true, that she was taking everything out of context, but she wouldn't listen to anything. I intervened. I asked her to calm down. I repeated that nothing was happening. At that moment, in the middle of her fit of rage, she slapped me. I think that makes it clear that I became the victim of this whole situation. I don't know what problem she has in her marriage, but there was no reason for her to assault me like that. Still, she continued screaming at me, insulting me, and blaming me for destroying her marriage. I tried to defend myself, to tell her that it wasn't true, that Esteban and I were just friends. But she lunged at me and started pulling my hair. Everything became chaos, screams everywhere, until Esteban managed to separate her and almost force her out of my apartment. They left arguing down the hall while some neighbors came out to watch. The looks they gave me were pure judgment, as if I were the one to blame for everything. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The next day, while I was at work, completely exhausted because between the celebration and the scandal, I had barely slept, Teresa showed up again. This time at my workplace. I saw her before she saw me. I don't know how she found out where I worked, but it was clear she had come looking for trouble. I ducked immediately and tried to leave the office, covering myself, trying to go unnoticed. At that moment, Santiago, my ex-boyfriend and co-worker, saw me and asked me what I was doing hiding. Teresa heard his voice, turned her head, and saw me. In a matter of seconds, she was on me again, insulting me, screaming that I had destroyed her marriage. She said she was pregnant and that I had ruined her life. She started hitting me while screaming nonstop. My co-workers, who are mostly women, backed away, calling for help, not knowing how to intervene. But Santiago, my ex, just stood there. He did absolutely nothing. He didn't try to separate her. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. He just stood there watching while Teresa continued to scream at me and hit me. Finally, security arrived and took Teresa away almost by force. She was completely out of control. I was trembling, not just from the blows, but from the humiliation of the whole scene. When things calmed down a bit, I went up to Santiago and asked him why he hadn't helped me. His answer was so childish that even now it makes me angry just to remember it. He said to me with complete coldness, "I don't get involved in what's not my business." And he left. If he really didn't care, I don't understand why he stood there watching everything that was happening. He didn't say anything, he didn't move, he didn't try to stop anything, he simply observed. After that, I had to talk to my bosses, explain what had happened, and make it clear that I was the victim of all this. Still, I received a warning, mostly because of the scandal that had been generated in the workplace. It was humiliating and exhausting. When I could finally sit down for a moment and breathe, I tried to contact Esteban. I needed to know what was going on. I needed support. He didn't answer my calls. Hours later, I got a short, cold message telling me that for now, he couldn't talk to me, that he was trying to avoid a divorce, and that he preferred I didn't contact him. Nothing more. The truth is, I didn't understand that reaction. I can understand that his wife is jealous, even that she feels insecure. But the violence, the level of aggression, that I can't understand. Much less that Esteban is now focused on saving a marriage when it's evident that Teresa has a serious problem. I felt displaced, as if suddenly I were the problem when I was the one who ended up beaten and exposed. I talked to another friend to try to understand the situation better. He told me that maybe Teresa had misinterpreted my relationship with Esteban because it's an intimate and deep relationship that from the outside can look different. But he also told me that it wasn't my fault, that not everyone knows how to have adult and stable relationships with their friends, and that many people confuse closeness with something more. Now I feel bad about how things are, not just for Esteban, but for everything that was unleashed. But I don't know if I want to, or if I should even try to help solve that problem. I don't know if it's my place to do something, or if the healthiest thing is to stay on the sidelines, even if that means losing someone I always considered one of my best friends.